Good evening. With a small delay, we can start this evening session. A very warm welcome to tonight's discussion with the title, Europe, the ever-sleeping beauty of world politics, ? My name is Maria Maltschnig. I'm the director of the Karl-Renner-Institut. We are very happy that once again we were able to organize this conference today together with our partners from Friedrich Ebert Stiftung and International Institute for Peace. This public debate tonight is the final part and also the highlight of this year's Vienna Peace and Security Talks. Around 40 experts gathered today to discuss the theme Geopolitical Europe Starts in the Neighbourhood. Yes, and the Vienna Peace and Security Talks have already become sort of a tradition, and a tradition in the most positive sense possible. Once again, it's a pleasure, Christos and Stephanie, and Hannes, that we can organize this together, and many, many thanks for the good cooperation. So in the closed doors workshop held earlier today, the participants and the experts discussed the EU's role in its neighborhood, with a focus on Ukraine, Moldova, the Middle East, and the South Caucasus. The participants assessed the EU's role in the war in Ukraine and in the reconstruction of the country. We spoke about the responsibility of the EU, both for Ukraine and for Moldova. And we examined the EU's capacity, or maybe more its lack of capacity, to manage conflicts in the Middle East. And the experts discussed the room and the need for engagement for the EU in the South Caucasus. However, the overall assessment is that the EU frequently lacks a clear strategy, as well as sometimes the ambition, but also capacities and capabilities. And of course, not least, the political diversity in the EU impacts the decision-making process. And all of this leads to the EU having less influence than it could, and perhaps also should have. In this public panel today, which will be chaired by Christos KATSIOULIS, we will sharpen the analysis, and based on the central challenges of the EU in the European neighborhood and the Middle East, we aim to paint a comprehensive picture. Against the backdrop of the many challenges the EU encounters, both in its neighborhood, but also on the global stage, our experts will explore the obstacles and opportunities in awakening the ever-sleeping beauty of world politics, as reflected in the title. There are many critical issues to address, and our panelists will bring a wide range of perspectives to the debate. I very much look forward to the discussion, and it's my pleasure to hand over now to the moderator, Christos KATSIOULIS, head of the FES Regional Office for International Cooperation in Vienna. Thank you so much for the cooperation again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. And thanks also from my side to the co-organizers, the International Institute of Peace for Peace and the Karl-Renner-Institut for this wonderful cooperation. It has become quite of a tradition here in the Orania to come together, and we're glad that you're interested in the not so uncomplicated matters we will discuss today. Let me start by criticizing our title myself. And I have to confess that I came up with the idea of having this sleeping beauty in the title. But it's a bad metaphor because in the fairy tale, you may remember, it takes 100 years. Then there's a prince coming by, kissing the sleeping beauty. They fall in love and live happily ever after. So in our metaphor here, who would be the prince? Is it Donald Trump? And are we comfortable with strange men coming by, kissing sleeping women? I don't think so. So what we try to express with the metaphor is that in the European Union, there is a sleeping potential. There is an expectation that the EU could be a force for more good, for more stability, more peace, more prosperity on the global stage, and it's not fulfilling that potential. And we'll try to assess a little bit how far the EU is already exploring this potential in the different regions we're looking at, and what could be done to make it even better. To test this, we didn't try to look at the global stage, at the really big plays. We tried to look at the neighborhood of the European Union, because where, if so, the European could fulfill its potential better than in the places close by that affect our own security, affect our own prosperity. And therefore, we will look at, first of all, Ukraine and Moldova, at the east of the European Union. We will look at the Middle East, and we will look also at the South Caucasus and the Balkans region, where we have close relationships as a European Union, and where a lot of instruments are already at play. And we will do that with the help of a wonderful panel. You can see 3 of them, I can see 4 of them, and let me just introduce them very briefly to you. I'll start to my left, Alexandra DIENES. She's senior researcher at the FES Regional Office for Cooperation and Peace in Europe. So first of all, she's a very esteemed colleague of mine I have the privilege of working with, a political economist with a regional expertise covering Eastern Europe generally, but more specifically Russia, Ukraine, as well as the South Caucasus, where she has just finished a research project. So look forward to a publication by Alexandra, Sabrina Kaschowitz, and Marilia Hushka that will be covering that region and will come out shortly, I hope so, this month, maybe early November. Then our panelist who joins us from Israel, and you will see her on the screen during the debate, Maya Sion. She's director of the Israel-Europe Relations Program at Mitvim Institute, the Israeli Institute for Regional Foreign Policies. And she just published a short paper on the potential role of the European Union in Gaza for the day after the war. Then further to my left, August PRADETTO, Professor Emeritus at the Helmut Schmidt University in Hamburg, the Bundeswehr University as it's also known in Germany. He was a professor for international relations and has done excessive research and broadly published on international conflicts, NATO, the foreign policy of Eastern European states, as well as German foreign policy. And the local matador to my far left, VEDRAN DZIHIC, senior researcher at the Austrian Institute for International Politics, lecturer at the University of Vienna. He works on democratization, European integration, civil society, and protest movement, and has a regional focus on Eastern Europe, specifically Southeastern Europe, and most specifically even the Balkans. And if you're a German speaker, he just published a book about his personal story called Uncommon, which I cannot recommend yet because it's still on my reading list, but I very much intend reading it. So thank you very much for joining me and helping us to explore the sleeping potential of the European Union. We will not have long speeches, except for mine, I'm sorry for that. No inputs on the panel, but rather follow a more conversational style. So I start by asking the same questions to all of my panelists, asking for poignant and concise answers. And I start with Alexandra, asking how would you assess the current role of the European Union, specifically in the South Caucasus? Is it a bystander? Is it a promoter of peace and stability? Is it party to conflicts? Is it having, at the moment, a positive role?
Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. I will try to give a short answer. However, there is no one role of the EU in the South Caucasus, because South Caucasus comprises 3 countries that have fairly different histories and are partly embroiled in very different conflicts. I'll try to be short nevertheless, and let me just start with Georgia and then speak briefly about Armenia and Azerbaijan. Well, in Georgia, as many of you probably know, the society is strongly pro-European. Really overwhelming majorities wish to join the EU. The image of the European Union is very positive. However, the ruling party, Georgian Dream, that has been in power since 12 years and will attempt re-election in just 2 weeks' time, has been following quite an erratic course recently. So on paper, they still commit to joining the EU and doing all the reforms, etc. But in practice, they're doing the exact opposite. Just a few weeks or months ago, you might have followed, there have been big protests in Georgia because the ruling party adopted a very controversial foreign agents law, which is very reminiscent of what Russia has adopted in Russia, you know, targeting dissent, targeting independent NGOs. Then just recently, a few weeks ago, there was a law against LGBT. So it's a very strange kind of course which forced the EU to freeze the Georgian accession process to the EU, because Georgia has been a candidate member to join the EU since December 2023. So this process has in fact been frozen. So it's a bumpy path towards the EU in case of Georgia. Armenia has traditionally been, so to speak, in the Russian orbit, but recently people got very dissatisfied with Russia since the war against Azerbaijan, where Armenia basically lost control, what was very dear to their heart, namely the area of Nagorno-Karabakh, which is considered part of Azerbaijan by international law, but is populated primarily by ethnic Armenians. So this has been a very, very tragic defeat for the Armenians, and they blamed partly this defeat on Russia, who, as a traditional security and economic ally, did not come to Armenia's support to prevent this defeat. And I'm oversimplifying, obviously, because you can imagine the story is much more complicated than that. But in any case, Armenian society and current Armenian leadership, which is very pro-European under government of Pashinyan, they try to reach out to the EU and try to find a new partner in Europe. Azerbaijan, just to wrap it up, is a rich oil, petro state in the Caucasus. It does not have the necessity to reach out to the EU for economic partnership or security partnership, so it has a much more distant relationship. Apart from that, it's also an autocracy governed since decades by the clan of Aliyev. However, the relationship has been generally quite good with the EU, but recently the EU lost credibility as an honest broker in the Armenian-Azerbaijan peace process, since France started arms sales to its ally Armenia. So, in other words, EU has a quite difficult standing in Azerbaijan and might have lost the credibility of a potential mediator in the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict.
Thank you very much. Just give us an idea of the relationship between the European Union and Azerbaijan concerning energy, because as far as I know, we're still buying lots of energy from Azerbaijan, aren't we?
Yes, absolutely, that's true, especially since Russia invaded Ukraine and the EU made an effort to decouple from Russia, from Russian energy resources, and concluded some new gas deals with Azerbaijan. So yes, we are buying Azeri gas. And by the way, I should probably mention that the EU is, of course, not a unified actor, and especially regarding Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict, there are kind of countries taking different sides. France, as I have already mentioned, is a traditional ally of Armenia, specifically because of a very big Armenian diaspora in France. However, there are other countries like Hungary, for example, who are staunch supporters of Azerbaijan, and then there are others like Germany or the Scandinavians who are somewhat in between and considered more neutral, at least from Azerbaijan's side.
Thank you very much. We'll stay a little bit in the closer surrounding of the European Union before turning to Maya, to the Middle East. Vedran, the enlargement instrument is deemed the strongest instrument of the European Union to influence whatever country is close and around them. What we have now, however, is we have a classic waiting room full of the Balkans countries, and we have a privileged waiting room where Ukraine, Moldova, and maybe Georgia are sitting. How would you assess this movement of having kind of two waiting rooms? And in your experience from looking at the enlargement process on the Balkans, where do you see that going?
Thanks a lot. Good evening. I mean, first of all, I like the metaphors, and I mean beauty, but what I miss is actually the beast. And when it comes to the Western Balkans, just to be to the point, I think recently the EU was neither beauty nor the beast. So it was rather kind of a dead man walking, doing business in the Western Balkans. And I think there is I mean, as you said, there are two waiting rooms. In the one waiting room, there is a geopolitical necessity to work with Ukraine and Republic of Moldova. There is pro-European and pro-democratic sentiment among the population, which you just outlined also for Georgia. And on the other hand side, we don't have that kind of support for the European Union in the Western Balkans. What we do have in the second waiting room is a mix of promising messages. You are still in the line and there is a European future for you. Just today, all the member states, not all the member states, but the representatives of the 6 countries met in Berlin for the 10th anniversary of the Berlin Summit, and then once again reaffirmed the perspective of the Western Balkans for the membership in the European Union. But those people like Johannes Swoboda, who have been not in the waiting room, but on the other hand side, where those countries want to go in Brussels for a while, we do know that after 24 years of the process, there is a certain exhaustion. So the people are exhausted, and the offer waiting on the other side is a different one than it was like 24 years ago. And here, why to come to this point of dead men walking with business strategies? I think there is an increased transactionalism from the European Union side. So transactionalism for the sake of financing the European Green Deal was just recently on display when the German Chancellor Scholz visited Serbia and signed the lithium deal together with the Vice President of the Commission, or is agreed between Edi Rama and Prime Minister of Italia Meloni to start running a migration or refugee camp on the Albanian soil for the sake of protecting Italy from illegal migrants. So those type of, or those examples of transactionalism in a close neighborhood mean that certain powers and forces in the region, and we have seen a kind of an autocratization tendency going on for a while, that they feel actually on a winning side because the one that is selling is making deals. Once you make a deal, you basically make yourself untouchable to a certain extent. That goes certainly for Aleksandar Vučić, who I would say is one of the most important political figures, but also the most destructive political figures in the Western Balkans, similar to Edi Rama, who is basically on a path to securing few more years on power. So when you mix this transactionalism with the promises, the remaining question, this is a question that we need to discuss when we look at Ukraine and Republic of Moldova, means what are we going to do with the values and the normative underpinning of the process of the EU enlargement, which once used to be major driving force. So basically you take countries in the process in order to make them more democratic, make them having a rule of law, human rights, etc., etc. And this kind of a value-based underpinning of the enlargement has, through this transactions, suffered a lot. So now the question basically remains, well, we keep discussing the geopolitical momentum of the EU, how to find back to some kind of a geonormativity, to combine the geopolitical interests with normative interests of transcending former authoritarian regimes, making them more democratic, and how to come up with a strategy to do so.
Thank you very much. We will delve into that a little bit later also, because what we've heard during our workshop today and yesterday was that, especially in Moldova and Ukraine, this European perspective has generated a lot of good and has generated also action by the civil society, by the states themselves in reform processes. And I think the same goes also for parts of the Balkan at least. But since you called for geonormativity, let's turn to the region which is the most difficult, and we won't delve into the different aspects of the conflict, but look at the European Union and its role in the Middle East. We have right now a war that seems to be escalating. The fighting has been going on since the horrific attacks of 7th of October last year. And now there is a threatening war between Israel and Iran with possible impact also on the broader region as well as Europe. From our point of view, it seems sometimes that the European Union is quite divided. If we can call it a bystander, that might be even a lot. How do you perceive it, Maya? You look at the European Union from your region for many years now. Maybe you have a more positive impression.
I'm afraid to say that my positive impression when it comes to the Middle East is maybe decreasing even. I'll say that the EU has shown quite a remarkable unity coming, at least from Israeli perspective, when looking at its reaction to the Russia attack against Ukraine. But when you look at the Middle East, the EU doesn't speak in one voice, definitely not when it comes to Israel-Gaza war or Israel-Lebanon war. You see the EU divided, and you see also a lack of legitimacy that other member states, countries in the region are feeling vis-a-vis the EU. So you can definitely see this division between the EU being, I would say, fully awakened to the situation in Ukraine and to the security threat that it poses to the EU itself. And it is alarmed by what is going on in the Middle East and the wars around Israel. But it's not out of bed yet, if to use that metaphor of the sleeping beauty. It is awake, it is alarmed, but it's not out of bed. And to get out of bed, the EU would need to change the sheets of the bed sheets, and perhaps change the decision-making processes. And that's a long-term goal. It's not going to happen in the near future. But as long as common foreign and security policy is being decided unanimously, I don't see the camps changing so much. And when I observe the camps within the EU, I see actually that the pro-Palestinian camp is perhaps to some extent even decreased a little bit. It's very vocal. It does take a few significant steps, such as recognition in the Palestinian state. So you see Norway outside of the EU, you see Spain, Ireland, Malta, Luxembourg, which are tiny countries, and Slovenia, also not a very big country. And when you look at the camp that is more pro-Israeli, you see some, perhaps maybe from the Israeli eyes, you see a little bit of disappointment in countries that Israel invested quite significantly in the last decade or so, or at least 5 years. So I speak about the Hellenic Alliance, Greece and Cyprus, which have considerably has drawn the relations much more together vis-a-vis Turkey, but it's not paying the dividends that Israel was thinking it may have brought it. So we see a sort of distance of Greece and Cyprus from supporting Israel. We don't see it go to the pro-Palestinian part, but it's not a very definite pro-Israeli one. Also, some Baltic countries, Romania and Bulgaria, we see still the very strong support by the Czech Republic, Hungary, by Austria, and by Germany to some extent, with different voices coming out of there. But their strong support to Israel still is still there. And so we see the EU actually being divided to three camps: the more pro-Palestinian, the more pro-Israeli, and the one that are a bit more bystanders. And this just doesn't allow the EU to be the player that it aspires to be in the region. And yeah, so we see the old common foreign and security policy being repeated here again.
Thank you very much. August, all of the speakers have alluded to unity being a strength, divisiveness or dividedness being a weakness, and that allows us to look a little bit into the internal dynamics of the European Union being able to shape global politics or being an actor on the global stage. This is something that we can kind of find a solution by altering the decision-making processes, but let's look at the status quo. How would you assess the internal structure of the European Union and following from that, its ability to be already an actor of international politics, especially in the neighborhood? Do you see any strengths that are there historically or problems that are historically there?
Well, thank you very much. Well, in the immediate neighborhood of the European Union, there are a lot of advantages given by the European Union to transform the former communist countries, to get on a way to have peace together. But this is limited, and it is not limited only because of the structure of the European Union itself. It was already said that it is not a unified actor like a nation state, but it is also limited, like a lot of nation state itself and other international organizations, when it comes to crucial conflicts at the periphery of some kind of, which is a conflict area. Especially when it comes to the conflict, violent conflict areas like Ukraine, in old times, Moldova with the Transnistrian conflict, in ex-Yugoslavia, South Caucasus, all violent conflicts we had or we still have. The crucial problem, and this is the, let's say, common denominator in all these conflicts, it is about nation-state building on the condition of multi-ethnicity. The crucial problem is multi-ethnicity and how to build a state or a nation on that conflicting ethnicity situation. And I think in such a situation, where it comes to identity problems and violent identity conflicts, the latitude of acting for an international actor or for an external actor in general is very limited. These conflicts are created within the region, within the country, among different ethnicities, and usually they are solved within these countries and not from external actors. It was like this in Yugoslavia. We had war. I mean, in general, there are three possibilities of nation building, of dealing with multi-ethnicity. First way is, I simplify a little bit, what I call the Swiss way. They are very different four ethnicities in Switzerland, and these ethnicities decided hundreds of years ago to live together in peace, to focus on joint prosperity, working on, and to create institutions they can make peace and keep this peace among them. If they focus on this, you have a peaceful solution and you have a nation that is today, nowadays, is not only one of the safest countries in the world, the richest country in the world, and one of the most democratic countries in the world. The second way, if you have to do with multi-ethnicity and conflicts, is what I call the Czechoslovakian way. You have two nations on a soil, they don't want to live together anymore, and they negotiate on a peaceful separation. You can choose this way. And there are other nations, like a lot of nations in ethnicities in ex-Yugoslavia. That's why we had the wars. This was the case in Ukraine. This was the case in Georgia. This is the case between Armenia and Azerbaijan, where these people and these ethnicities didn't choose the first, the Swiss, or the second Czechoslovakian way, but the violent way. I just want to conclude one thing, why I think there's a second reason why European Union has very limited possibility to act in such a situation in these conflict areas. Because when it comes, and this is the strategical idea of playing a role in world politics and in conflict situation, when it comes to strategic decision-making within the European Union, it is not the European Union in the first place that makes a decision on something. the European Union is not only the European Union. The European Union, for 90%, is NATO. Only 4 out of 27 member states are not member states. This is Austria, Ireland, Cyprus, and Malta. And these 4 countries represent 3.77% of the population. So strategic decision-making is made by European Union in the sense that the NATO states, for instance, if it comes to the question how to deal with the Middle East, this is a question and a strategic decision made by Washington or by NATO Brussels and not by the European Union Brussels. But partly, and to a big extent, these are the same states in the European Union and in NATO, and that's why I think by the European Union itself, there's very limited ground and latitude to act in such conflicts in a positive way. If these conflicts are overcome and these states decide to live in a peaceful way, and we go in the direction of prosperity and living in peace together, then the European Union can do much more.
Thank you very much for making my job very difficult, because I wanted to leave you with a silver lining today. Of course, now you brought also NATO in. We'll try to leave that a little bit on the side, because going to the core of your argument, the European Union being an actor of 27 member states, the member states are decisive. And we see that. We saw that also when Maya said that there was a unitary response in Ukraine, and there was complete divided response concerning the Middle East conflict. So when there is a political will of these 27 member states, there are at least more instruments that can be applied. We won't go into the specificities of solving multi-ethnicity conflicts, but looking a little bit at the instruments that are being applied, going to VEDRAN once again, how would you assess the political will at the moment concerning enlargement? We saw the decision to promote Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia into this privileged waiting room. How necessary is this political will for a success of this kind of enlargement process?
I think it's crucial. I mean, when you look back at the enlargement rounds so far, I mean, all of them were to a certain extent geopolitical and included this geonormativity. I mean, even the Big Bang in 2004 was made out of strategic reasons. And then Bulgaria and Romania in 2007 were certainly not ready, but were accepted based on the political will. So today we could even take this argument with the political will and say and argue if the European Union wants to become a geopolitical player, it needs to include the neighborhood as soon as possible, as close as possible into the inner circle, and go for, let's say, a big bang in the Western Balkans and a very speedy inclusion of Ukraine and Moldova into the European Union. I mean, but this is probably not going to happen. I mean, where we stand right now is, I think, the EU or the member states, because we always have to differentiate between the EU and the member states, has a strong commitment. And of course, Ukraine and Moldova is pushing the enlargement topic ahead. And I just recently was at a conference where Ukrainian colleagues, but also colleagues from the Republic of Moldova, actually said and outlined with the huge self-confidence, basically, that the EU needs to make choices fast and tell us we're not going to wait for 24 years. If we wait for 24 years, there will be probably no European Union. There will be some kind of, I don't know, a small group of states protecting from Russian aggression or from Chinese aggression. So if you want to take us in as fast as possible. We are not going to accept yes and no at the same time. Say yes or say no. So there is a sense of urgency. In the Western Balkans, there is unfortunately no sense of urgency. And the tools that have been used so far are not set to deliver. Now, the EU has, for example, introduced a recent step, new growth package. So 6 billion euro, which is a lot of money, for the economic development. Yet again, just before the deal or around the announcement of the deal, China also came, or Chinese president came to Serbia, Xi Jinping, and signed a free trade agreement with Serbia and outlined investments for the next decade that are overtaking this 6 billion by far, only looking into Serbia. So if you just do it with economics, you're not gonna make it. So basically the question is what is needed? And I think what is needed is first of all, as kind of a self understanding within the 27 what they really want. As long as the beauty is sleeping, it's quite good because the beauty can wake up and even the prince can kiss the beauty and this is going to be good. But as long as we have the beasts among the 27, and I mean, Viktor Orban just demonstrated again how he doesn't want to be the prince and he wants to be the beast within the European Union. As long as we have those types of politicians that certainly are not up for any value-based enlargement, but I mean, for authoritarian-based enlargement, he would go. Like Serbia, he would immediately accept. I think this is not going to work out. So we need a urgency, a sense of urgency within the European Union, EU27, bold steps. If Hungary is blocking the process, and if anyone else pops up and says that basically we want to go to status quo and change the Brussels for some kind of a different union, then the majority of value-oriented, democracy-oriented, human rights-oriented, and peace-oriented states within the European Union needs to start marching forward and creating new possibilities and opportunities for the others to join the club. So I think we are looking into the time of bold decisions under very difficult circumstances. And this is going to be a kind of $1 million question, not only for the commissioners, for Ursula von der Leyen, for the High Commissioner for Foreign Policy, but whomever they call. If they, I mean, $1 million questions, you can call the public and you can choose a relative to help you with 50-50, but whatever they do, they need to do it as fast as possible. Otherwise, there will be no one around to answer the question.
Thank you very much. Alexandra, this sense of urgency, this kind of trying to wake up the sleeping beauty and become an actor on the global stage, how far is that induced by external actors? You mentioned several times in your introduction Russia. VEDRAN now mentioned also China. Is that kind of the noise that tries to wake Europe up?
Yeah, at least from the results of this field work I have been doing in the Caucasus, I had this impression that there's a growing perception that there's a competition between actors for certain regions, competition for influence. I am, however, a little bit critical of that reading, and if I were to advise the EU, and now we're focusing on the EU a lot, I would rather advise the opposite. I would advise against viewing certain regions through this, for instance, Russia versus the West lens. And there may be many reasons, like Vedran outlined, why a speedy or staged EU accession for certain countries that are ready or that are willing is a good thing, and we should do it as the EU. But we shouldn't be doing it just for, putting our flag there before the Chinese do or the Russians do. So I think it's a little bit of a dangerous simplification. However, there are certain realms, and economy is one of them, and connectivity, where I think the EU is indeed sleeping a bit more than it should. We've been talking a lot how the EU is weak as a geopolitical actor, as a security and military actor. However, I think EU sometimes underestimates how strong an economic actor it is, how strong a regulatory actor it is. So just to give you an example from many conversations in the South Caucasus, especially in Azerbaijan and also partly in Georgia, there emerged a big interest in the so-called middle corridor. As you may have heard, this is this alternative route how goods from China could reach Europe via Kazakhstan and then crossing over Caspian Sea and through Azerbaijan, Georgia, or Turkey, all the way to the EU. This is one opportunity how the EU could engage, because it's not just about promoting trade and getting goods through China, from China on an alternative way. It's a big work of harmonization of trade standards, of increasing capacity of ports, of simplifying customs procedures, tariff harmonization, etc. All that where the EU is really the world champion, I guess. So this is one area where I see the EU could be this force for good and could put its economic flag into the region. By the way, not just Caucasus, but Central Asia, since this middle corridor would connect both regions, which would, as economic analysis by the World Bank and EBRD show, improve the welfare in the region. In fact, much of the trade going through the middle corridor would benefit the region itself. Only about 1/3 would be the transit from China to EU, like I mentioned, but 2/3 of the trade would actually benefit the region and help them diversify trade routes. And as you can imagine, when infrastructure is built, there are opportunities for local businesses, there's more economic activity, there are taxes generated, etc. It's a bit of a rosy picture I'm painting here, no doubt. There are many bottlenecks on the middle corridor, there are many political obstacles, but this is just one idea how the EU can actually unfold its potential where it actually can, and where it is very strong, and where it is desired by local partners.
Thank you very much. Before going to Maya and looking at the potential role the EU can play from your point of view in the Middle East, August, I wanted to ask one more question concerning the internal dynamics of the European Union, because we've discussed now a lot about the decision-making processes in Brussels and in the capitals, but how would you assess also the domestic stability? Because we've seen election results throughout Europe that seem to be directing in an isolationist corner, I would say. Would you share that? Do we have the domestic stability in the European Union to kind of be this actor on the global scene?
It's me.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm sorry for that. Well, I support very much what Alexandra said, and I think European Union is an important actor on the global scene when it comes to economy, when it comes to mediation, when it comes to the question, share your experiences with us by transforming your countries into prosperity, how you can establish democratic structures, etc., etc. There is a strong capacity of the European Union. This is the one thing. But no actor, as I said before, you can't expect external actors to solve the problems, crucial, existential, and identity problems of countries and of regions. They have to do this by themselves. There's no other way out. It is completely true, and I agree, and I'm very much in favor to give the perspective and to give this possibility to have an orientation and to give help, etc., etc. But as Alexandra, I would warn when it comes to geopolitical competition. What do you call it, geopolitical competition? What does it mean, geopolitics? It means I define the region or the country of my interest, and I'm looking for my friends in these countries who should belong or should bring their country or their region to my region. That's what is the core of geopolitics. You look for friends, and this is not the way we should do. That's not the way the European Union should act. We have a lot of actors in the world doing like this. What we should do as a European Union, I think, is that we support regional integration. Still in the 90s, the European Union was much in favor for integrating the South Caucasian countries, all three of them, or to have a regional integration in the area of the Balkans. This was completely given up by geopolitical ideas. Where are our friends? And by this kind of thinking, that we have to compete with foes, with enemies, instead of asking the question how we can solve or how we can contribute with modesty and not with the idea of we are very superior and we can tell all the world how to do it. I mean, by the way, in the past years, whenever did you hear the words modesty, humility, diffidence from a European Union leader. I would stress very much this because our capacities in very different ways are very limited to go in this. So, conclusion, what I would do if I were in this place, I would go into these countries, talk with all the different groups, and not only with the friends who say, I want to be your friend, but with the different groups. And with modesty, look, modesty because we do not know the situation really. And it turns out at every corner that we didn't know about Afghanistan, we didn't know about Iraq, we didn't know about Kosovo, we didn't know nothing. So go there with modesty, look around how you can help, look around in the region how you can help on this stage of economic diplomacy, democratic support, help, and then try to implement some projects. Don't think about big geopolitics. It's the wrong way to do, and it always exacerbates our conflicts we already have.
Thank you very much. Modesty and humble approaches. I think Donald Trump was the last one expressing them, wasn't he? But I very much agree with this kind of approach to see how can we be part of solutions that are owned and implemented on the ground. And I think no region is a better example for that than the Middle East, Maya. So we have now opened up the lens a little bit, and we went back from security alone, looked at the economic potential of the European Union that allows us also to see more of the strengths that we possess. How would you see these strengths applied to the conflicts in the Middle East? And I'm not talking about a solution, but being part of a positive development in the sense of modesty that August just described.
Yeah, I support the notion of modesty. Just two short comments, with your permission, to some issues that were raised here. So other than Russia and China as competitors or rival to the EU, I think Europe should add Iran and its proxies to the list, be it the Houthis, be it other proxies. I think they should be in this list. And regarding just a small comment about internal dynamics, political dynamics in the EU, the more that we see that EU citizens elect right-wing, extreme or populist governments, that actually supports, they join the camp that supports the Israeli government. I wouldn't say Israel, but the Israeli government. And I would say that one last comment that, and that goes also to the European Parliament elections in June. And then when we speak about old solutions and what can the EU do with its old tools and old decision-making processes, and for example the old solution of the two-state solution. I think, and we discussed that in at the panel in the morning and noon, the notion is old, but I think new content, new wine should be poured into this old bottle of two-state solution. I think it can be, the political vision can be renewed. So now let me come back to the question about the tools that the EU can actually apply to this conflict between Israel and I'm going to focus on Israel-Gaza or Israel-Palestinian Authority. So first, the EU is an economic player. It has a financial muscle. It is a payer, and it can turn this being a payer to being a player. So exercising the financial muscle to come with conditionality. So if Palestinians are being granted funds to maintain the Palestinian Authority stability and its mere existence, then it can come, and I've spoken about that, it can come with the conditionality that it should reform, should be less corrupt, should have much better policies oriented to the Palestinian population, to their citizens, so to speak. And such conditionality was also raised by the Prime Minister of Ireland and Spain. Not so much conditionality, but more in the language of sanctions, economic sanctions vis-a-vis Israel, with the association agreement that Israel has with the EU. The EU is the major trading partner of the entire southern Mediterranean countries. And so Israel, a third of its export and almost half of its import comes from the EU. And so this economic muscle can be very significant also in terms of all the cooperation that Israel has with the EU, be it Horizon, be it Erasmus, be it all those really vast, a long list of cooperation. And this is not something that I think would go through. This is not something I would also recommend, because the EU needs to consider it as being a reward for terror, being a reward for Hamas and Hezbollah and for Iran. So I'm not supporting that. But I'm just saying that the EU does have this economic instrument that I think it's much more efficient than any other instrument that the EU has, because it is not a security player. At least it's definitely not a reliable one, not even when it comes to common foreign and security policy missions. So even if Israel regards UNIFIL, for example, the force in Lebanon, as being very weak, very unobservant of its mission, allowing Hezbollah to be very, very, to have those military operations and bases and rockets launching pads from 100 meters or very close to their own, the UNIFIL camps. So the EU is not a reliable security actor in terms of Israeli perspective. And so what you're left with is being a civil player for state building that has to do much more with the Palestinian state building that Israel does not wish. But I think the whole international community, be it the European ones, be it the Arab Sunni pragmatic countries, be it the United States, are all speaking in the same voice of this old notion of two-state solution. And I think the EU can have some new visions how to pour this new wine into this old bottle. And what Borrell was trying to promote, and let me say that Borrell is really not a reliable, not a legitimized player in Israeli eyes because of his what's conceived to be very biased anti-Israeli position. But the EU can try and promote this program of using more carrots to give both to Israel and the Palestinians if they would approach in the long term for a political solution that would give them also security. And if not, how to use the sticks that I've mentioned, the financial one, the economic ones. So setting a political vision was very helpful for the Palestinians in the 1980s, in the Venice Declaration, then supporting the Oslo process. And the EU was much more advanced in their political horizon than the United States. I think in the middle of the 90s and in the 2000s, the United States and the EU are on the same normative note, on the same political horizon of two-state solution. And now the question is how to bring the Israelis and the Palestinians to the table. The feelings and the traumas are so deep that it will take a long time. But I think that after the Yom Kippur War, of when Israel was, it won the war, but it was beaten in the battle itself, that when Egypt invaded Israel and Syria attacked Israel in a very harsh manner, and the cost in soldiers' life was immense. The trauma after Yom Kippur eventually brought also to the peace process, to the peace agreement with Egypt. We need a different leadership, obviously. This is not something for the current Israeli leadership. This is not something for the current Palestinian leadership. So we lack a lot of leadership. And I think the political vision can come from Europe, and especially convincing Arab countries. We saw that Borrell was doing that at the UN General Assembly. We saw also the Americans speaking about the two-state solution. So I think political horizon can be the next thing on the EU's agenda.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have a very short question to you before giving to Vedran and then opening up for the public. You mentioned conditionality and the different economic muscles of the European Union. Would that include, from your point of view, also an arms embargo from Europe against Israel if there would be a huge disagreement about the way Israel wages the war? And make it a short answer, please.
Short answer is no.
Okay.
I think the security of Israel is something that Europe is obliged to respect. It also, I think Israel should oblige to respect international law, international humanitarian law. I know it's hard to perceive it from European eyes when you look at the devastation in Gaza and the very high death toll in Gaza. But I don't see another country giving warnings, as it did in Lebanon, to the civilian population to leave their homes in order for them not to be hurt. This does not take place in Ukraine by Russia. You saw it also in Gaza. Israel announces the people, please leave, and it is Hezbollah or Hamas that makes them stay. So I'm not here to defend the way Israel has, not completely defend the way Israel conducted this war, but I think we need to, arms embargo would be a reward to terror. I think dialogue should be built with the Israeli government, especially with the IDF. So, and I think it's being done. I think Israel is very much attentive to the allegations of war crimes and especially genocide. The Israeli society is not, I have to say, empathic enough to the Palestinian suffering, not enough. Definitely, and it's very hard to do that after the 7th of October. For many people, I can understand them, even if I feel differently. I don't think arms embargo is the right way. And let me also clarify that 30% of Israel's security exports come from Germany, about 70% from the United States. So what's left for the other European countries is 1%. And it's just usually not a significant part of the offensive. Maybe it's more defensive, other than the F-35 parts, which are American parts. Yeah. I don't think the EU can actually use, or EU countries can use that as a leverage against Israel, because you just don't have the, it's not a leverage tool.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to push a little bit back on the conditionality aspect, therefore. Thanks for clarifying that. Vedran, last question to the panel, and then we open up for the public. Maya mentioned conditionality. That meets a raw nerve for myself, having been in Greece during the financial crisis, but conditionality sounds pretty familiar in the Balkans as well. Do you think that this can work if there is no clear strategic goal? Because we have seen in the Balkans that there's enlargement, the carrot very, very far into the corner. There's lots of conditionalities. What does that do with societies if there are no tangible successes that can be reached step by step?
Conditionality, it works only if there is a kind of a time perspective that's doable. Conditionality in the Western Balkans has stopped to a certain extent working and delivering because the time frame is simply too long. There's a crisis of expectations that people have been expecting so long, and now the conditionality has limits. But for the conditionality to work and to deliver, you need to streamline internal procedures and internal promises that you have, your policies. And the EU has been zigzagging when it comes to the application of conditionality in the Western Balkans, and that must not happen in Ukraine and the Republic of Moldova. And you can't, one of the no-dos is to compromise conditionality, but by including too much of this transactionality. And in the Western Balkans, starting with infamous Sebastian Kurz, who I don't know where he is today, but closing the Western Balkans route and making in the first step, the Western Balkans to a kind of a migration dumping ground of the European Union. Now this lithium deal, which is quite problematic and compromises the conditionality, is the second step. So I think that's quite dangerous. But I just going beyond your question, just one last remark, and I'm curious what the people in the room have to say. But I think if we just listen to us here, we could just go outside. It's dark anyway. Just sit somewhere on the corner and cry. So cry over the fate of the European Union. Cry about the impossibility to show the economic muscles. Cry about the fate of the European Union in the Middle East. Hope for Ukrainians and Georgians, Moldovans to stand up and say we are carrying the flag. Cry because we can't handle the multi-ethnicity, etc., etc. I think we just need to, and I think this is the European task for the future. So we need, first of all, to say this is a wonderful continent to live in and a wonderful union. When we look at the numbers, 27% of the population today lives, only 27 lives in democracies. The most of them are in the European Union. So when you look at the core of what freedom, democracy, liberty, human rights mean, there are not so many places left for those most powerful ideas of the humankind. Sometimes the light gets darker, but the light comes back. And I think the EU needs to, have this self-confidence to say, yes, we still do represent and stand for those values. Yes, we engage in geopolitical battles. We need to put more money into security, etc., etc. But we need to believe that the values that we cherish are the most powerful ones and act upon these promises. And that includes, act internally, like we have to do now in this country, to prevent, I would say, a far-right, racist, and xenophobic party or anti-democratic force of entering the government. And we have to do the same exercise in Germany and ask many of questions. But I think this light tower that the EU used to be and still is and can be, we need to just reclaim it, make it bolder, and not just go out and cry and cry and cry. Otherwise, the tears just disappear and there are no results. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That's exactly the avenue I wanted to go into with Maya said political vision. Alexandra said several times that Europe is connected with democracy, prosperity. The pro-Europeans are the forces that are trying to reform the countries. She looks at the values you just described. This is still, I think, a source for optimism. So we'll try to get that into your minds before you leave the room. But now you have the opportunity. I'll allow a few questions from the floor. Please just say who you are, be very short. And please ask about Europe. We're not going into the conflict in the Middle East, nor in Ukraine. And we'll start with Ina and then the gentleman before.
Okay, Ina Melnikovska, Central European University. I have a kind of first a common and related question, challenging the notion of this a kind of increasing EU economic power and connectivity without taking into account who are the enemies and who are the friends. Because, what we definitely learned from a kind of such connectivities with Russia is that sometimes connectivity can lead to vulnerability and a kind of additional costs. So sometimes if we are not selective with whom we get into the marriage, it could result in abusive marriage. And so the question is then, what role of values and then basic security issues do you see in those kind of economic relationships across the world currently in the EU? Because out of the discussions, it looked also like, I agree with one of the speakers, VEDRAN, that it looked like the beauty woke up and then want to fall asleep again. Yes.
Thank you very much. The micro just in front of you, the gentleman. Next one.
Thank you very much. So my name is John Saito, University of Vienna, and I have two short questions. So first question is, sure that democracy, human rights, or rule of law is a strong asset of the European foreign relationship. But on the other hand, these values is these values is in question at the domestic level of the member states. So now, because of the increasing power of right extreme parties, and in such a situation, how should we deal with such a challenge in order that the European Union plays a role of global player, not only global player? And the second question is, so now the European Union and NATO have now not reorganized, but now European Union have a new commission, and NATO have a new Secretary General. And my question is, how will the European Union with Kaja Kallas, he has decisive political will to confront or to master the challenge from Russia, and also Mark Rutte as the Secretary General of NATO, who can good relation with even with Donald Trump. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And then the gentleman on the left here. Yeah, please.
Thank you very much. Karl-Renner-Institut of the Danube region, Central Europe. I have a question about Georgia. I remember the EU was extremely critical to the rather erratic Saakashvili president and his party. However, when Georgian Dream, which was mentioned, came on stream and was the follower, there was no criticism at all, despite of the fact that, for instance, the founder, Ivanishvili, is a billionaire and made all his money in Russia. So there was no critical voice. Only very recently, when now the NGO legislation was passed and other things, I think there's a wake up. And isn't that a little late? Well, sometimes we don't seem to understand the countries enough who would like to become, or maybe not even anymore, to become members of EU. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The lady here in the second row, and then the last question, and we'll finish up.
Yes, thank you very much. Gudrun Steinacker, former German diplomat, Vice President of the Southeast Europe Association. I have a particular question referring to what Mr. DZIHIC said last, that the EU should remember its own values it's based on, despite all the internal problems the EU countries have right now with right-wing movements. Which openly want to eliminate these values. But my question is referring to the Caucasus. I think it was a total defeat also of an organization like OSCE, what happened in Armenia, what happened in Nagorno-Karabakh. And now even Azerbaijan is destroying the cultural heritage of Armenia in Nagorno-Karabakh, and the EU is practically doing nothing. So why? How is it possible that we are not even able to defend these basic values? And if we talk really about basic values, if we talk about the cultural heritage in a small area like that, and we do wonderful business with Azerbaijan.
Thank you very much. And the last question is the young lady in the first row. And if you have more questions, we will have a glass of wine afterwards, and the panelists will for sure answer them directly. Please.
Larissa Lorch, I'm currently at FES Southeast Europe Dialogue, and I had a question. Should I stand up? Okay. Larissa Lorch, currently at FES Southeast Europe Dialogue, and I had first I wanted to object something that was said. I don't think that the war in Bosnia, for example, was just because ethnicities couldn't get along, and I don't think that this is what is happening in Ukraine right now. It is about power, it is about economics, and this is something that I would like to get into. First, you have a question to VEDRAN, and I can recommend his book. You mentioned the new growth plan for the Western Balkans. We have the situation right now that, for example, Bosnia and Herzegovina is not going to get the first tranche of the money from the new growth plan for the Western Balkans because they could not decide on a reform plan. What do you do in this situation? Because, I mean, we are pushing for progressive solutions, but if the other side is also not delivering, how do we deal with it? And then I was also wondering how far, I mean, I actually want to underline a question was already asked, how far do we go with conditionality in the partners who want to have economic dependencies from?
Thank you very much. So we,
I come from North Wales.
wonderful. We will do that. I'm very thankful that there's a Brit around praising the European Union, because you know what you lost, and we should do that more. But now I'll give back to the panel for a very short answer for all of you, and you can also put your concluding remarks into that. And we'll start with Maya. There was no direct question to you, but the role for security in economy might also be something you have thought about. Maya.
Yes, indeed. As I said, the EU is not a successful security player. I don't see it building its security strength not towards the southern Mediterranean region. At least what the EU is after is to stop migration coming from this region. And for this, it uses its economic power. It has signed agreements that gives funding to Tunisia, to Egypt, to Lebanon, and I think to Jordan just recently. So it uses its economic power, financial power, to give a few billion euros and to ask for less migration from those countries. When it comes to Israel, again, as I said, the EU is not a security force. It is a normative power that Israel listens to it with half an ear. So I think the Europe and the EU is important in terms of legitimacy, in terms of the West, that Israel is still considered itself to be part of the West. And I think it will continue to be so. I hope it will continue to be so. Those are a few comments. One thing about interconnectivity, if we try to end with a more optimistic note and look and try to envision the Middle East and the vision that Israel and the United States actually shared when it came to the normalization agreements, other than skipping the Palestinian, which was a mistake from the Israeli government, I think it should be corrected. I think the Palestinian state should be part of that vision of the new Middle East, of the India Middle East corridor, economic corridor, as another economic corridors that would transfer goods from the Southern Asia, Southern Eastern Asia through India and the Gulf countries through train or other transportation from Saudi Arabia, Jordan to Israel, and that can include the Palestinian. That could develop a different economy in the Middle East. So the EU can have multiple paths, economic paths. It doesn't need to be a sole one, and then it can diversify its economic routes, and meanwhile having much more leverage through these those corridors, economic corridors on the region, and a much more positive influence on the region.
Thank you very much. August Pradetto, there were questions about the new leadership in the European Union, new leadership in NATO. How would you assess this, this impact?
I think at the moment it's getting more and more NATO, the European Union. You ask about this relationship. I think what is for me a problem I already expressed, with the geopoliticization of European Union foreign politics together with all these NATO states who are at the same time European Union members, having geopolitical interests and military missions to Libya, to Iraq, to Afghanistan. All this was declared our geopolitical interests, and we cannot deny that on the one hand we have this face of the beauty, which is just a civilian power with strong economic ties and democratic values This is the one side, and it's the beautiful side of the European Union. The other side is that we have this geopolitical actor which is connected tightly to USA decision-making and to NATO decision-making. So we, as European Union, at least partly, and it was always the majority of the European Union members, going in all these missions. Now, what comes back now to us is a huge migration from Northern Africa, from the Middle East, from Afghanistan, and we have big problems. So my plea would be, my assessment to this new leadership is that they even strive to be more like this. Kaja Kallas, the new Secretary for European Armament, Kubilius, van der Leyen by herself, the new Strack-Zimmermann, head of the Defense Committee of the European Parliament. They all have the idea we have to go even more geopolitical. I would want to do that because we get more conflicts, and it is not only that we get more conflicts and that we have to do always more military solution thinking. It strikes back on the European Union. Part of our internal more and more coming up problem of right-wing, racist, xenophobic movements are resulting from this kind of geopolitical thinking because it strikes back. And so my plea would be modesty, focus on the development and the safety within the European Union and the neighborhood, the close neighborhood, on the prosperity, try to get your best out of common prosperity and developing the market of the European Union and the neighborhood, and promote your democratic values within the European Union and in the neighborhood. And don't go too far because it strikes back and it destroys piece by piece the basis of that, what is the beauty of the European Union.
Thank you very much. Alexandra, there were a few questions concerning the South Caucasus, but also security and its linkage to economy.
Yes, thank you very much. Excellent comments. Maybe first on connectivity. Excellent point, but I would like to highlight that connectivity is not just about dependence, but it's also about diversification and interdependence. So while both is true, let me highlight how economic connectivity may promote regional cooperation, and this is particularly true for the South Caucasus, I believe, and can be maybe a confidence and security building measure, particularly in the long term, if there's a peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan, if they trade more, if they engage in more economic activity, this may be an avenue for peace. We know it does not always work, but this is certainly an avenue worth trying. The point on Georgian Dream, why we were not criticizing them, well, this party has been in power for quite a while and transformed itself, just like Saakashvili, who used to be celebrated as the reformer and who successfully combated corruption in the beginning of his term, who was leading the Rose Revolution, as you remember. When Georgian Dream emerged, there were similar expectations connected to it, and the course of the party was different than it is now. This is why my analysis, and this comes not just from my own thinking, but from speaking to people in the region, is that what we see now is primarily an internal dynamic of this party clinging to power and using the playbook from Russia, how to best cling to power, and not necessarily aligning itself with Russia. There may be an aspect of that, but what we see now is actually a growing authoritarian process, which leads me to say here in front of the big audience what we discussed in the workshop, that for the EU it makes sense to invest in democratic institutions rather than democratic rulers, or the ones who are perceived that way. So this is, in this case, right that the EU has shown Georgian Dream a cold shoulder and has put the accession process on ice. And after all, it's in the hands of the people. And we will see in 2 weeks how the people will vote in the election. And yeah, it's not so much up to the EU in this case. And I would like to leave you with one public opinion data, which is very fresh. This is a preview to the next edition of the Security Radar, which our office of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation is regularly conducting. This year we have conducted the poll also in Georgia. Let me cite just one figure. We asked people how they think their country, Georgia, should position itself. Should it align more closely with the EU, with the West, or with Russia? Or should it align itself with both sides? And guess what? The overwhelming majority, 57%, chose this third option. They said, we want our country to have a balanced foreign policy, balanced position between Russia and the West. This is just a food for thought. This is very fresh public opinion data. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Vedran, there were questions for you. And if you could put some praise of the European Union, more praise of the European Union already into your final remarks, please.
I can give my best. To Bosnia, the Bosnian question. Now Bosnia is the only one that has not delivered on the preconditions for get the money from the growth plan. And this is the best example, basically, how the ghosts or the mistakes from the past come to haunt you. I think the appeasement, or at least a kind of attempt to pacify Milorad Dodik in the Republic of Srpska after years and years of secessionist threats, but still trying to find a kind of a way to navigate because he's close to Vucic, we need him, etc., etc. I think that comes now back to haunt you. And I think, unfortunately, I'm a Bosnian citizen still, but I don't think that I can help my fellow citizens because they will need to stand up and then be supported by the European Union in actually creating a positive force bottom up to change the political setup, which is a true misery. I think this is Bosnia. The next public panel will be on Bosnia, and then you will have a lot of optimism. So this is a pessimist one on the EU. The second one on I think this is a crucial question, what to do with the rise of the far right and how that's going to change the landscape of the European Union, what the European Union is. I think we tend to fall into this kind of a vicious circle of negativism when it comes to this rise. Certainly in this country, after these results, you can't be optimist. You just keep asking yourself, why, for God's sake, so many people give their votes? But there are explanations, and you can look into it. And I think there are a few tools and strategies that need to be implemented by still the pro-democratic and liberal majority in all the countries, including Germany. Stop mainstreaming the far-right narratives. It doesn't pay off. Could be a message also to the German coalition right now. Don't go with measures that are ruining the spirit of the European Union, like introducing border controls in Germany. Act upon the tough questions. Migration, ask for solidarity, legal ways, etc., etc., and offer hope instead of politics of fear. But we just have right now simple solutions. Tell the people that there are no simple solutions, but there are good outcomes if you strive and if you fight. This is the second point. The third point, I think whatever we put here on the table, I think there is one notion looming around the room, and that's the question of the outcome of the war in Ukraine, of the Russian aggression in Ukraine. I think, unfortunately, the EU has to do a double exercise. It needs NATO and the EU and the US to put all efforts in trying to find a solution that this war is, under certain circumstances, won by Ukraine. But it's probably naive to expect that all the territories will be recaptured, but to offer a quick entry of Ukraine into the European Union, security guarantees, etc., that needs to be a priority. Then comes the rest. And finally, the fourth point, I think the Nobel Prize for Economics was just, I think, announced yesterday. And the three guys, I still need to learn the names. One is Acimoglu, and the second one is Mayer. I don't know, but you can look it up, and I'm going to learn it until the next panel discussion. But they came up and got the Nobel Prize for Economics for a very substantive insight in how societies do work. And they say that if you have institutions, if you have rule of law, if you have liberal values in place, and if you engage into kind of a very complex, protracted, but yet at the end efficient strategies of decision makings within the democratic framework, that creates prosperity. Autocracies do not create prosperity. I mean, they do create prosperity for a few of the guys, but they don't create prosperity for the many. And I think this is the crucial message of the success of the European Union. We need to fight the geopolitical fights that we have, but we need to refocus on what the EU really is. It is about prosperity in difficult times, in times of climate change, etc., but it can be done if there is a common effort, yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for the questions. We started out with the Sleeping Beauty. We had ghosts in the debate. We had Beauty and the Beast. We even had some dwarves, small countries. And we had big bad wolves with Russia and China. But that's not a fairy tale, because fairy tales are very easy. You do live happily ever after and you have nothing to do. But I think the main conclusion is that we all have a job to do if the European Union should succeed in kind of using the potential it has. We need to push for political will. We need to push for acting on tough questions. We need the boldness and political vision, and we need to ask our politicians about that. And the second thing, I think there needs to be a modest assessment of our own strengths, the institutions, the rule of law, the processes we have created, and a very prudent application of these strengths in the regions that are important for us, in the Balkans, in the South Caucasus, in the Middle East with the political vision Maya mentioned, but also, of course, in Ukraine, in Moldova. And saying a last word on Ukraine, you mentioned the European Union perspective for the country. It is about winning the peace for the people in Ukraine, and that should be the main aim. And that should also be a sign of hope. With that, I leave you and wish you a very, very nice evening. There's a glass of wine waiting outside for you if you want to continue the debate. Thank you very much once again, and have a very nice evening.